everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of the Bao Podcast. Our guest today is no one less than Serge de Gheldere. Serge is a climate ambassador of Gore, initiator of the climate case against Belgium, which he and his colleagues recently won, and the founder and CEO of the only company I ever applied for in my life, Futureproofed. The mission of Futureproofed is to help businesses and cities become future-proof by helping them reduce their CO2 emissions while also saving costs, driving innovation, and becoming more attractive. A mission we at Bao Living can only applaud for. Two branches of Futureproofed are working towards this goal. You have Futureproofed Cities, which is a software platform that connects over 145 municipalities and helps them implement their climate plan. And then there's CarbonCap, and it's a similar service but aimed at businesses, launching in September of this year.
That's right.
Okay. CarbonCap enables businesses to measure, manage, and reduce their carbon emissions faster and easier across their organization. Yeah. On top of doing all of this, he is also recovering from leukemia. So as you hear, there is a lot to discuss. So let's jump into it. Welcome, Serge.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So there is a lot that we can dive into as we hear from this introduction. But I always find it interesting, before we go more into the details, just to look at where it all started. Because I think Futureproof was kind of maybe a bit early. Like maybe you were a bit of a visionary company in a sense, that you started so early working on these problems that we are now more and more as a society getting focused upon. So I think it's very interesting for me, and then I assume for the listener, to hear where the idea originated from, and also where did your passion for the environment and helping to solve the issues that we're facing, where does this come from, this drive?
Yeah. Where does it start? Maybe it starts in the Scouts long ago, where we were still attuned to nature and living with nature and respectful about waste and all of that. Then somehow I had this argument with people in high school about whether or not to use recycled paper, and I thought it was ridiculous. And then all of a sudden I thought maybe they have a point. And eventually the person I run Futureproofed with, my partner Steven van Praat, was a guy I did my thesis with at Groep T as an industrial engineer. And I remember that when we published our thesis, it was one of the first on recycled paper. And then on the very first page we quoted a hippie saying, that sounds, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And we got a lot of criticism for that at the time. So maybe there was some embryo of the idea at the time. But in all earnestness, it probably started in Chicago, because before Futureproofed, I had another professional career as a product development engineer for a big healthcare company called Baxter. And I lived in Chicago for 1.5 years. My daughter, Vera, was born there. And we were, in touch with a completely new way to look at sustainability when we lived there. There were a lot of restaurants where eating vegetarian was like the most natural thing you could do, and which it was also, the tasteful choice. Not you wouldn't do that out of idealism. It was just one of many tasteful options. And I remember a fantastic restaurant making fajitas with portobello mushrooms. It was excellent. And also they had a supermarket chain called Whole Foods, which is now also penetrated in Europe. It's been bought by Amazon a couple of years ago. But at the time, Whole Foods was quite special. You would go there, it was all natural, organic, but in a non-condescending way. It was really attractive shops. I don't know if you've ever visited a Whole Foods.
Yeah, I was in the first time in the States in 2008.
Yeah.
And I remember walking into a Whole Foods and I was like, what is this?
Yeah. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
And that idea, that not going there because you want to save the world or because you're, convinced that you're better than others, but just making this choice easy and attractive and appealing was for me like a trigger. Like, there's so much to do. And as an engineer, I just found this an angle that was worth exploring, a bit like what you're doing here, thinking, why is this not more common? Why can we not have more of easily access to eco-design products, etc.? And then, short term, after returning back from the US, I decided to start Futureproofed with the initial idea of focusing on eco-design products. Because I thought, like Herman Miller, Aeron chairs or interface carpet or whatever, energy efficient lighting at the time. I wanted to bring those together and make the choice easy for people to purchase and use these products. And so, there's been several phases. It was a one-man project for a long time, and then we became a consultancy focused on climate. And that trigger on climate happened in 2003, when I was actually exposed to Al Gore's presentation. But before, it was An Inconvenient Truth. It came out in 2006. I saw a webcast for NYU where he was doing a presentation. And I saw the graph in which you go back 800,000 years and you see, the CO2 going up and down, natural cycle, and you see the temperature closely following. Okay, all of that is normal. And then all of a sudden, in the last, 100 years or so, you see the CO2 just skyrocketing, going through the roof. And I thought, if this is real, how is it possible that this is not page one news every single day? And from then on, I decided to narrow the focus, not talk about environment and eco-design, but really focus my activities at Futureproof on how can we help resolve climate change, but with the same mindset, not by being less bad, but by helping companies and cities and product development become more attractive and making the choice easy and compelling and profitable. And then it became a consultancy, and now we're in the third iteration, if you want. It's a small team of 16 people. We're based in Leuven, and we have become a tech company with tools for sustainability, in which we move beyond the consultancy model, and we develop platforms for companies and for cities to work on this climate, to reap the benefits, but to do this in a more modern way, instead of just us selling billable hours and producing Excels and reports. We want to have a more modern way and to help cities, and that's what it's become now. Yeah.
What a journey.
Yeah, from Whole Foods to SaaS platforms. Yeah.
And when was this? When were you living in the States? What year was this?
95, 96. And I would have stayed a couple of years longer, but then my father was dealing with cancer, also bladder cancer at the time. And we came back shortly after the birth of my daughter, and my father died a couple of months later. So it was a lot of change in a very dense period of our life, moving back and forth, changing culture and countries, having a first kid, and then losing my father. It was an intense period, but we look back fondly at it. When I see what's happening with the States now, I'm kind of I really like the States. I loved living in Chicago, but I think they've really lost their way, and there's been a lot of harm done.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking about, 95, 96, and then you living there for 18 months, and you saw on multiple fronts that they were ahead in the climate movement in comparison with Europe. And then if you look at them now, I mean, especially maybe it's turning a bit now, but the last 4 years it just seems that they completely lost the lead on that front in the last 20 years.
And what's sad about this is that it's been hijacked by political parties, and it's been politicized because, and there's no reason for it, honestly. If you look at what happened with Klimaatzaak in the Netherlands, the one thing they also won in 2015, and then again and again, and ultimately, in higher appeal court, the judge awarded the win to Urgenda and to the Klimaatzaak. But what it brought about was that it depoliticized the climate issue. It's not a thing of the Green Party or of the socialists. It actually brought together all the political parties who said, yeah, okay, the judge has spoken. Now we roll up our sleeves and we get to work. And if you think about it, there's something for all ideologies in this energy transition. It's not just to be dark green or, to impose a way of living on people. Every ideology can find, and speak to their audience in that way. You can obviously, care for the environment and the planet, the Greens, or be conscious about the people who are living in energy poverty, the socialists. But if you look at it from a Christian Democrat point of view, you care for the creation, if you want, or for non-religiously for the normal families who will have a hard time dealing with the changes. If you look at it from a liberal point of view, there's gonna be need for so much innovation and entrepreneurship in the coming decades that you would need to be all over this. And then it's tricky, but if you want to touch migration and all of these other topics, we had better get going if we want to make sure that people still have a decent way to live elsewhere and not all forced to here. So that's the sad thing about the States, that this has been hijacked by Republicans, whereas of all people, they have so much to win. You have the Teslas and a couple of great examples, but you could have so many of them who would be at the forefront with their entrepreneurship and innovation, creating jobs. And I think Biden has a shot at changing that perception with his American Jobs Plan, which is in fact a climate plan, but it's called American Jobs Plan. It's very clever.
Well done.
Yeah, well done. But he, for instance, he went talk to the how do you call it? Vakbonden, the unions.
Yes.
The coal unions, for instance, who, it's been the scare of all politicians, but because if they shut down coal, we lose so many votes. And he said, this is what is happening. Coal is never coming back and is becoming more and more expensive. And he actually got the full support of those coal workers and workers unions, because he says there's going to be need for so many new kind of jobs, wind turbine technicians, insulation, PV panels on all. That he kind of, got their confidence, and they said, if this is the case, we're going to support you with your American Jobs Plan. So they've lost a lot of time, but I think, they're in it for real this time. So we shouldn't underestimate what can happen with Biden.
It's also typically American, huh? Like it's always extreme.
Black or white. Yeah, absolutely.
Last 4 years were really extreme in the opposite end, and now probably it's going to go the opposite way, and then they will, in 4 years or in 10 years, do probably 3 times as much as we on our step by step.
That's true. Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But so that's something you've noticed in the Netherlands. They have won the lawsuit against the government, right? And then from the moment it was won, the different political parties came together and they said, okay, fine, now, we can't talk about it anymore. Now we just need to start doing. That's really something that they notice now.
Absolutely. And that doesn't mean that it's solved.
No.
Far from, because now the discussion is how are we going to finance it, and how do we plan it, and what's feasible and not. And it's really, really hard. Don't get me wrong there, but it was amazing. And it's not my reading. It's the people who, Roger Cox, or the guy who initiated the idea of climate lawsuits, and who's the the person behind, the Urgenda case, but also behind the Shell case in the Netherlands, actually clearly reflected this, that this was a big change in the way this was dealt with in the parliament. And instead of asking the question, should we be ambitious or not? Should we go all in or not? It was the question about how are we going to do it? How are we going to organize our society in the next coming 2-3 decades to be able to do that? Like what they've done with the Delta Works and all of that, and now they're facing this big societal absolute transformation, and they're focusing on the how to do it and not whether we should go all in or not. And that's the really interesting point. I think that should be on the debate table now for the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I recently listened to the podcast of Rutger Bregman. I don't know if you know
of course.
The Rudy and Freddy show. Great name, I think personally. And the other one, I forget his name now, but you have like Rutger and then his friend. And
Freddy? No, I don't
know. He was making a point because recently in the Netherlands, Shell also got like a lawsuit.
It's also Roger Cox. It's the same guy.
It's the same guy. He wrote the book, and then he's an academic, but then he made it practical. Which is very inspiring. But he made the point like, okay, it's good that we do this, right? We're setting a precedent, which is good from one perspective, but from the other perspective, or an idea that he had was like, imagine that Shell lowers its production of oil because it needs to. It's been decided by law. Because it's on a national level, isn't it going to be compensated, because we live in a capitalistic system, by a producer of oil from Brazil or Argentina who is producing this oil in a more damaging way in order to also supply the demand? And aren't we at the end doing a net negative?
Yeah, it might be. It's an easy argument out, though, I think, because it was the same argument about electrification of cars. Should we impose, emission levels on cars, and will it not be just a compensation elsewhere? And then you saw that electric cars became a thing, and people just choose them not because they have to, but because they're better cars, and because they're attractive and drive fantastically, and it's just a better product. And the same could happen with Shell, because what the lawsuit is not saying is that Shell should stop to exist.
No.
But it says that, Shell, if you look at your whole value chain emissions, the extraction, processing, but also the use of your products in people's cars, you are responsible for those emissions. You have said since the 80s that, this will create damage. They have internal videos about this, which precede Inconvenient Truth by like 20 or 30 years. Amazing. It's called a climate of concern. You can see them on YouTube. And so they've known all along, and what Shell has done in the past, they can do again, because they were more or less responsible that all of the Netherlands adopted gas as their source for utility power. They created the gas networks in the neighborhoods, etc., and that lasted 10-12 years to have all of the Netherlands, be connected to gas grids. They could do it again. They could do it again to electrify and still exist, reinvent themselves as an energy provider, not a fossil fuel provider, but as an energy provider, and make sure we have easy access to charging station and heat pumps and all of that, all the things that are necessary to electrify the Netherlands, just as they've done with the gas. If they saw this as a business opportunity, nothing could stop them with such and then if there are others who still want to invest in fossil fuel, that becomes still more expensive and socially less accepted, and that will be regulated sooner rather than later. If other companies in Brazil want to do that, yeah, well, fine, let them, and they will become the Nokia or the BlackBerry or
they're digging their own grave.
Yeah, exactly. So I understand the argument, but it's really the key thing here is, how do you look at this? Do you look at it from a compliance point of view? We have to be in order with the law, or we have to do this or that, or do you look at it from an opportunity point of view? And you have to really be dumb and slow not to realize that this is the end of the fossil fuel era. And if you still want to be around in 10 or 20 years, you had better get going and reinventing yourself. So it's unfortunate that a lawsuit is necessary, actually, for these guys to wake up, especially since they've said so since the 80s. So we'll see. It's a big deal, and it's a really big deal, that ruling. So it could set about a lot of similar lawsuits elsewhere in the world. And if that is what is necessary, well, so be it.
You put it very beautifully, I think, in the sense that it's indeed quite a shame that a lawsuit is necessary in order for those guys to realize, like, hey, you're missing the biggest opportunity of our time.
Exactly.
And then especially, like, another beautiful example, and we talked about it yesterday as well, so I don't want to, or in a previous podcast as well, I don't want to keep mentioning it, but in the car industry, those lawsuits will probably not be necessary, because there was one who set a precedent and who is getting a response now from the market, you are going after the biggest opportunities. So it's beautiful to see that the capitalistic system can also work in the benefit of these new
True.
Yeah.
And then, and I've overused Tesla because I'm a big fan from I've been driving more than 11 years, I think, Teslas. But it's easy to forget that, only a couple of years ago, people would laugh at them and say, oh, well, it's easy to create a sports car, and then it's easy to create a premium sedan, and then it's, the Model 3, nobody will buy it, and all of that. And, time after time, they proved wrong. And all of a sudden, like clockwork, 5 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, all the major players said, oh man, this is serious. And then Volkswagen was probably the one that reacted most adequately and forcefully on time. And they have some great models out now. But I'm pretty sure that some car majors will go bust, just like BlackBerry and Nokia and Kodak have. And I used to think it would be Mercedes, maybe, but now Mercedes announced that they will spend 40 billion into electrification. It's a bit late, but maybe I think it's going to be Toyota now, because I saw recently.
Really? Toyota?
Yeah, which is incredible. I had 3 Priuses before the Teslas, and I thought, this is great. It's actually by driving a plug-in Prius that I decided to buy the first Tesla. I thought, I just want to be fully electric, and the plug-in Prius had 20 kilometers of fully electric range, and it's very frustrating then to hear the engine start again. And so I said, I want to go full electric. But they were so far ahead at the time, the 3rd generation Prius and the batteries and all of that, and they completely missed the train. Because now they're actually lobbying. I read an article yesterday. They're actively lobbying against electrification and emission norms, whereas they were the pioneers, etc. And they're too slow. And so we'll see. And I hope to be clear, I don't want any company to go bankrupt because it's hundreds of thousands of employees, etc. I would want nothing more than everybody to fully embrace the electrification. But that's the name of the game. If you blink, you miss the opportunity, and it's happening right now.
Yeah, things are going faster and faster. Huh?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Maybe to get back to the lawsuits. Mm-hmm. So it's beautiful to hear that now the Dutch are combining the efforts and going after this goal together after the ruling. Are you expecting a similar result now in Belgium? Now that you've won the...
Yeah, we've won, but we're not there yet. I don't know if you know the details of the ruling, but we asked 4 things. It's like a 4-stage rocket, in which first for the 58,000 co-plaintiffs to be to have standing, as they call it, to be recognized in their demands. Says that we won, which is a worldwide precedent. In the other climate cases, it was the organization, like Visit with Klimaatzaak, but then in the Netherlands and Ireland and elsewhere, that was recognized, but not the individual plaintiffs. So that we won. Second was also the ruling that in Belgium there's a violation of human rights for those 58,000 people, which is crazy when you think about, in a Western civilized country, having a college of 3 judges saying that by not acting ambitiously enough, the Belgian government effectively violates the human rights of Belgian citizens. You would expect that in China or North Korea or elsewhere, but it happens right here. And actually, by clockwork, we saw 1 month later with what happened in Wallonia with the flooding. It's effectively right to life, right to living and housing that is being violated. We had literally that in our ruling, and so it's happening right now as a consequence of negligent climate policy. But still, we have stage 3 and stage 4 that we want to win. And so we're thinking about, what the future actions will be. Stage 3 is actually having what they call injunction, so an obligation to achieve certain reduction targets. And that they won in the Netherlands. Science-based targets, which tell our government that, in order to have a safe energy transition, we need to reduce at least by 65% the CO2 reduction, the CO2 emissions in our country between now and 2030. And that we haven't won yet. So it's kind of like having somebody being pulled over in the highway and saying, hey, you're speeding, you're driving 180, you're speeding, and then ask the officer, okay, what speed am I allowed to drive here? That we don't tell you. So it's like, so it's kind of a very Belgian situation. And then the final stage is actually having financial consequences tied to reaching or not reaching those goals. But it's still a big deal. Don't get me wrong. And we're really happy. It's like you're climbing to Everest and we've achieved base camp. Everybody's still on board. Everybody's still alive. We have 58,000 people who are with us on this trip, which is like the largest lawsuit ever in Belgium, but also worldwide, by far the largest climate lawsuit. So it's a big deal. And we'll see what steps we are taking next.
So from the 3 big points, the first 2 were approved, and the third one they are keeping in consideration then?
No, they rejected.
They rejected?
Yeah.
On what basis?
On the basis that there's a separation of powers, so-called. You have legislative and executive power, and they said that the judges actually said that they cannot pronounce themselves on those percentages of reduction, because then they would take the place of the parliament, which has to decide.
Right.
Which is not true, because in the Netherlands it wasn't like that. Also because we're not saying how to get there. We're only saying that the science tells us that the only safe trajectory is reducing at least 45% by 2025, at least 65% by 2030. How to get there? We don't ask or pronounce ourselves about this, whether it's through carbon taxes, through mandatory insulation, through whatever massive infrastructure campaigns, or there's a million ways to fill in the how. There's not a million ways to decide the how much. Mm-hmm. Essentially, if the judges say you're violating human rights by negligent climate action, there's not 100 ways to actually take away that violation. The only thing to do is to listen to what scientists say and be on the trajectory of the Paris Accord and respect the carbon budget that we have. And there's but so we'll see what happens next.
So it's if I read between the lines, everything you've been doing ever since you met Al Gore or saw the presentation, it's been really focused on reducing the CO2 emissions and working on this.
Yeah.
How long does Futureproofed exist now?
More than 20 years. I started. I started late 1999. As a one-man project. I was still working for Baxter, and I was toying with the idea of doing something on my own. And I had a parental leave, and so I was exploring. The official Notary Act is from 1999, but it became a thing a year later. So more than 20 years. I heard the presentation in 2003. Then in 2006. I was selected as one of 2 Europeans to go to Nashville in Tennessee, to where Al Gore lives, and where he organized a second training for what they call climate ambassadors. It's called the Climate Reality Project. It was the second time only he did that. The first time was at his home, only 50 people, and then the second time was in the Marriott in Nashville, or the Hilton, and there were like 120 people and only 2 Europeans, and I was one of them. And then that's the title, Climate Ambassador between brackets, because then you were officially allowed to use the slides and talk to people, and you were briefed, and we got updates, etc. And since then. But actually, since 2003, the main focus has been on climate. So on both aspects, climate mitigation, so it means reducing the CO2 emissions, but also adaptation. How can we start to prepare cities and companies, etc., for the climate change that will happen anyway? Because what we're seeing now, and this really pisses me off, by the way, Benjamin, is when we see the reaction now of all the people who are upset about the flooding and all of that, and we say, it's climate change is real and we should do something about it. It's like, seriously? You need this to happen in front of your door after 30 or 40 years of scientists giving you one report after the other with mounting evidence and peer-reviewed by tens of thousands of people around the world, and everything happening everywhere, and collapse of ecological systems and coral reef, and seriously, it needs to happen here. So I'm really appalled by everybody writing opinion pieces now and saying, we're all at fault and we should do something about it. I think it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous on one hand. What's scary though is that the effects that we are seeing everywhere in the world and now at our doorstep are actually the effect of CO2 accumulated until the 1980s. There's a delay of 30 to 40 years between emitting a ton of CO2 and seeing its full effect play out. So that's a second reason why I'm pissed off, because it's mighty late to react also. And whatever we do, even if tomorrow all fossil fuels are cut off, it's going to be a lot worse for many, many years before we actually see a ramp up again. So even though I love the work we do, we have a great team, we laugh a lot, we have, We work with some great clients and cities and mayors and all of that, and it's fantastic work. I'm really lucky. It's sometimes really heavy to be in the know and to be with your nose on these facts day in after day, and then seeing how slow everything is and how there's still disinformation and resistance, and politicians who think we have to be careful and look at what's realistic and all of that. It's sometimes very discouraging to be in there.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
So, and I've read a lot about the entire subject matter, but the fact that you just brought up, I probably have read it, but I don't know if I, without knowing it, that I put it away or something.
Yeah.
But like, even if you would stop globally emitting anything at all, there's nothing that we can do in the next 30, 40 years to keep it from...
It will continue to become much worse before it improves again. Yeah. Because we know we have this global warming locked in. It's happening. It's actually, when you look at the ocean, the largest part of global warming is actually not even visible, because it's stored in the oceans as like a thermal battery almost, and it takes many years before this effect fully plays out. It doesn't mean that there's not an effect, a shorter term effect right away. But there's a great TED talk that's probably already 10 years old by James Hansen. He's kind of the godfather of climate science, and I don't know, 10 years ago or so, he had a TED talk called "Why I Must Speak Out on Climate Change," and there he really makes those facts explicit in a very non-emotional way, but it's very confronting. And he's been publishing, and he's been jailed many times as a protester. He used to work for the NASA, for the Goddard Space Institute. He quit his job to be more activist, etc. But he was the guy who organized the first congressional hearings at the time, saying and showing to Congress in the US that, climate change is real and we need to do something about it. And I'm speaking about probably in the 80s or so. So when you look at the bare facts like that, it's sometimes really hard to stomach it. It doesn't mean, and don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean we should, abandon all hope and just...
No, of course not. It's not an option.
It's not an option. And also on that front, change can be non-linear. All of a sudden, an idea, the time has come for a given idea, electrification or whatever, or the fantastic way the energy battle is being won by renewables. It doesn't have anything to do with regulations or with activism. It's just purely economics. You see the exponential improvement of renewables. It's like with Moore's law, with computers, or the price of PCR testing. Like we have access to PCR testing. When I was still at Baxter 20 years ago, PCR was like an upcoming technology, and it was mightily expensive. Now it's super cheap. Price of networks, everything, a lot of technologies go through what is called Wright's law or Moore's law for computers. And it's the same thing with renewables. Every time the installed capacity of solar PV or wind turbines or offshore wind or batteries doubles, the price per unit goes down by a predictable amount. And you can almost, draw mathematical equations that predict. For solar PV, it's huge. I think it's 32% or so now. So every time the square meters of solar panels in the world doubles, the price per panel goes down by 32%, which makes that it's more accessible and people will put more of them. And then there's economies of scale, and and so we go to an almost zero marginal cost system for energy. We'll have to organize it differently and store and have demand response and all of that. So it's not solved yet, but the price per kilowatt hour actually evolves to quasi zero.
I heard a lot. You hear the term Moore's law. Every 18 months, the strongest processor doubles in capacity, and that's been going. I've read that multiple times throughout the last 10 years of my life. But I never heard about the other law. How is that called?
Wright's law.
And that's every time the amount of installation of a specific technology doubles, the cost lowers by 33%.
No, not 33. It depends on the technology.
Right.
For a solar PV, it's 32. For wind turbines, it's 10 or 11. Offshore wind is a bit less. Batteries, I don't know, it's maybe 15% or so. So depending on the technology, but it's the same thing with networks and PCR and all of the things. There's also a great TED talk about this, actually, by Ray Kurzweil, who looked at it from he's like one of the most decorated scientists.
I saw him live in Antwerp.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, this guy. And you might not agree with some of his forward-looking statements, etc., about how we'll have nanobots and our veins, etc. But he did an interesting study looking back at the past 100 years for other technology and mobility and all of that, and somehow you can always draw this line, and we don't recognize that potential for exponential change. We always think the future will be a repetition of what we now know, and it's going to be electric cars are going to be too expensive, and we'll never be able to store energy, and this and that, and then suddenly you're in Norway, where I think 70 or close to 80% of new cars are electric or electrified, and it's like, wow, how did that happen? And suddenly it's there. When you look at Steve Ballmer, the ex-CEO of Microsoft, his reaction when the iPhone was introduced in 2007, he's like, there's a video on it on YouTube. A $400 phone. That doesn't have a keyboard? Who will buy that? And then the rest is history. So I love it when those moments happen. You've seen it in transportation as well. I don't know if you've seen the slides that Tony Seba uses. He's a Stanford economist, about mobility in Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. And it's 2 slides from, I think, 1906 or so and 1912 or 1915, where you see the same shot, Fifth Avenue. And on the one, you have to look carefully to spot one car, one of the first Ford T's, and then the same view, black and white, grainy. Then then the question is, where can you spot the horse and cart? And in 12 years, 80% of mobility shifted from horse and cart to automobiles, and this I love. And so that's the only thing that I can clamp to still be hopeful looking forward, because all of a sudden, ideas whose time will have come will become mainstream, and then, there's no going back. So let's just hope that we're in time there. And I think that's one of the reasons why I do Klimaatzaak and I do Futureproof, to try to accelerate a bit that moment when we get there.
How do you look at carbon capturing? Like, for example, recently Elon Musk announced this 100 million X prize to give an incentive to our scientists to work on this.
It's worth looking at, but we shouldn't hold our breath for a Deus ex machina solution, because there's so many things that we can do right away that are there in construction, in mobility, and energy production, the things you're doing, there's so much low-hanging fruit that we shouldn't wait for the miracle solution to come. This being said, we have to have the discussion, and we even have to have the discussion, I think, about geoengineering as well, which is completely let's not go there, which is, I don't know, there's many ways to look at it. We would want all of the possible solutions that we can have access to, I think, and have many parallel paths to pursue. The risk is that if we think that this is gonna work, we can continue business as usual, and we don't do anything right now, then it's a real risk. But on the other hand, we probably will need all the help we can get. So it's worthwhile looking at.
Mm-hmm. I heard an interesting, I don't know if it was, or I read it, I don't know anymore, but I heard this concept about planes dropping phosphor in certain layers of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And for $1 billion, which in these days it's a lot of money, but it's not crazy. There are like 1,000 people in the world who could easily lose $1 billion.
Yeah.
They could bring enough phosphor into the right atmosphere with planes to lower the temperature of a significant amount of body of land, like a country, with like a couple of degrees for like a couple of years. So really buying time, apparently.
Yeah.
And then there's then you just, if you think about that concept, what's gonna happen if those southern countries, and there's like this one rich guy who's like, we are screwed first because all those northern countries have been emitting so much CO2, and we don't have the time now to build the necessary infrastructure in order to help us.
Yeah.
But the downside effects were like the phosphor would go up north and then it would land on the polar caps, and it's like a big gamble.
I know.
But game theory wise, what's the chance that that's gonna happen?
Yeah. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, I don't.
But it's a fair point. We need to have the discussion because the risk is that some state actors like China or so might decide to go at it alone because they see the Yangtze River and the Yellow River disappearing, their glaciers, more than 1 million people dying per year out of air pollution, all of that. So they could say, hey, it's time that we do something about it. And so we need to have the discussion, at least, I think. It's like talking to your kid. Don't do heroin. Let's talk about it. But it's scary. It's scary for those reasons, because you pull at one thing in the world and everything is connected. So when you start dropping massive amounts of things in the oceans or in the atmosphere, like we've been doing for, with this experiment, like dropping CO2 in the atmosphere is one huge science experiment also, and it's not turning out well. So, substituting it with sulfuric acid might not be such a great...
No. Maybe to bring it a little bit back to the something that we are professionally active in, the construction sector. Because, as I told you before we were recording, the reason why we started Bao Living is because we wanted to have a positive impact on this issue. And we just looked at like, okay, what's having the biggest negative influence, and we saw it was construction. And then we started to look into this issue, and then we delved a bit deeper, and then we came to the installation of these utilities. But in the many years that you've been active in this in the climate mitigation industry, as I can call it, have you seen anything that's making you optimistic on this front, or?
Yeah, it's also a mixed bag in the sense that on the one hand, I'm incredibly disappointed. Yeah, thank you. Disappointed and pissed about the low pace of innovation in construction industry. I think it's hard to find another industry that is still so, how do you call it, ambachtelijk?
Outdated.
Yeah, crafty. I mean, we wouldn't take it from any other industry. Let's say you buy a computer or a car and they say, okay, well, let's sit with your car architect and see where we can source some steel and aluminium and how we'll build the pistons and all of that. Seriously? No. And so that's still happening. On the other hand, I think what you do from the interior, it's not decoration, but installation point of view is super interesting. The same is also happening on the structural front. And if you combine that with the need for renovations and especially energy renovations, then I think exciting things can happen. I'm fairly confident that with new buildings, we are getting there because of regulations. There's new buildings have to be near zero energy for the moment, so that's good. There, the European regulation worked, and I remember at the time in 2006 when they introduced the EPB ruling, and as I said, kot was te klein. The architects would go bust, and I remember people rushing before 31st December 2005 to get their building permits in order, because otherwise they would have to build an energy efficient building. Go figure. It's like, oh. And now every 2 years it becomes more and more severe, and now we're here in 2021 and you have to build a near zero energy building. So that's kind of checked off, done. But what do we do with the existing building stock? That's the main challenge. And this is much, much harder. And there's a lot of innovation happening, but it's not on the scale that we would need. If we're serious, we need to increase our renovation rate from, less than 1% that it is now of the building stock per year to 3 or even 6% per year. We should be.
Is it only 1%?
Yeah, I think it's less than 1%. Yeah,
and that's annually.
Yeah.
So 1% of the total stock we renovate annually.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Yeah. It's and everybody says it should be 3%. But I just read in the latest scenarios, for energy transition in Europe, it should actually go more towards 6%, which is hugely ambitious. I mean, for a city like Leuven, 100,000 inhabitants, 2.6 inhabitants per family, so it's probably like 50,000 buildings. 6% would be 2,000 to 3,000 houses to renovate every year. And, you can imagine the kind of wharf that brings about. On the other hand, again, from an opportunity point of view,
that's huge.
Yeah,
it's
huge. Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a market waiting to be captured. And the trick is, how are you going to do that? Is it going to be in the crafty way as we've been doing one by one and putting up scaffolds and all of that and, spending 3 days measuring it and designing? Or are you going to do it like you do in prefabricated in a kind of an industrial mindset and do it large scale? And this is what excites me. I see this happening. I saw this years ago already in Austria. Weissenseer was one of the first companies that did massively industrialized approach to passive house building, where they dramatically simplified the kind of wood profiles they would use, simplified the skin from 9 layers to 4 layers or so, and they had a CNC-driven process that would, make all the construction elements in 2 days, and very, very clever. If we can apply that thinking to the renovation opportunity and bring in not only, constructors, architects, material producers, but also designers. There's such a culture here also in Antwerp with the design schools we have, but they seem to be focused on producing yet another chair or compostable, how do we call it, lekkist, things like that. Yeah, cute, and it makes for a nice end of year exhibition. But look at the real problems in the world, and this is a major problem. How do you skin existing buildings to make them energy efficient and attractive, and maybe include some greenery or whatever? So there's a huge opportunity there, and I think we're seeing the first signs that even the big players in construction are taking this seriously and are thinking, how can we approach this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they will need to. It's basically, I hope that we are going towards the same direction in construction as we are seeing or we have seen now in automobile, and we are starting to see in fossil fuels and the forward-looking bigger players, like one of our single known investor now is the Groep van Roei, which is one of the bigger construction companies in Flanders. They are 280 years old as a company, which is crazy to think about it.
Yeah,
I don't know how many 280-year-old companies there are in Europe, but I guess it's not that much.
Yeah.
But they are looking ahead, and they are trying, and they're making strategic investments in businesses like ours, or they're combining efforts with other, and it's motivating to see. But then at the same time, I'm also, because we've been doing this now for 5 years. So we graduated 2014, 2015. So we've been working on it for 5 years. First 2 years were R&D development, and then since May of 2018 we started commercialization. But at the same time, I sometimes have the same feeling or the same frustration as I felt with you like 20 minutes ago, because it's these stupid things like, for example, building permits. It's ridiculous, 2 years in Brussels. It's not an exception. We are now able to do our first bigger project, 20 flats in the European neighborhood, at the end of this year, beginning next year, roughly
really?
that time. Yeah. First project we can do now.
Yeah.
We came into contact with that party November 2018.
Wow.
And the biggest time suck, to call it like that, between that first contact and that we can start building, permits.
Yeah.
It's 2 years. In Brussels, it's 2 years. In Flanders now, with everything with COVID, it's getting to a year plus on average, that we've noticed in the last year with all the projects that we have in the pipeline.
Yeah.
And then now we in discussion with international players who met us online, who see our YouTube channel, and they're like, whoa, this is interesting. So I've been talking with a Canadian company for a couple of months. I told him this. I told him in Belgium it can go up to 2 years. He laughed. And I was like, no, it's not a joke. I'm for real. And he's like, you can't be serious. How can this last 2 years for a permit? I said, yeah. 2 years. Yeah. And he said, if it lasts longer than 6 weeks with us, it's a lawsuit by definition.
Oh, really?
It cannot take longer than 6 weeks. In Luxembourg, the same apparently.
Yeah. But so, I like a lot your approach, and I think it's very courageous, and I hope you will be rewarded for that, because it's this kind of modular thinking that we need for all aspects of building, and it makes so much sense, not only on the waste generation, but eventually on the way people will look at building and how you can create your interior space and maybe change them over time, etc. And it's I like that approach. So I hope you're one of many exponents in the building sector to start thinking like that, because everything is there really. You have the measuring capabilities, you have CNC, you have AI and robotics helping us out. I saw a great software in the Netherlands that actually maps out, with the use of drones, the skin of a building, and then the software can automatically propose scenarios for energy renovation. So what would take days of work of energy auditors is actually automated. They have a team of 50 or 60 people, software developers working just on that, and it's quite spectacular. So I think we see signs, and I really support what you're doing. I hope you're going to be hugely successful, because we need some shake-up in the construction industry.
Thank you. That's nice to hear. I see that we're approaching the time limit, so maybe a couple of last questions.
Yeah.
There's a lot that there's a lot of still topics that maybe we can discuss in a second, in the next session. But maybe one thing, like you've been doing this for 20 years now.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about the next 5 to 10, or if you think how you want to end your career with Futureproofed and Futureproofed cities, which we haven't even touched upon, how do you look at that?
Yeah, I'm not thinking about ending it quite yet.
Okay.
So, but
but if you imagine that you're at the end of your career and you look back, what would you have liked to achieve? Maybe
But that's a great question. With Futureproofed cities, it's quite a simple proposition. It's the idea that we recognize that many cities face the same kind of problems. They have a huge role to play in the energy transition because a city is an excellent scale in which to intervene. You have mobility, energy, buildings, all of that, green. They're also responsible for 70% of the worldwide CO2 emissions, so it's a great place to intervene. At the same time, it's really hard. The teams in cities, administrators, they have their hands full with permits and other things, etc. And it's often a 1 or 2 man team, a woman team that tries to coordinate climate efforts and climate projects. So what our vision there is to actually bring those people together and give them an easy way to establish a plan and say, okay, if you do this and this and this is the CO2 reduction that you can bring about in your city. This is the kind of investments and projects that will be needed. And these are the co-benefits that derive actually from climate action, so that they can sell climate action to their citizens, to investors, and to the mayors, saying, look, if we do this, we actually become a better city. Mm-hmm. We become a more attractive city, and we will create X number of jobs for solar panels and new constructions, etc. So that's our vision. And the vision with Futureproof Cities is that this would become a network. It is already a network, that cities around the world would learn from each other and say, hey, the guy in Zwevegem or in Malmö has a great solution. I can learn from them or from her, and let's work on this together. And it's starting to be like that. We have a community in Futureproof Cities. We now have our 2 first cities in Sweden. We have 3 agglomerations in France. We have 1 in 5 in Flanders, 1 in 4 in Wallonie, and 1 in 3 in Brussels. That's on Futureproof Cities. And so by bringing those people together, we hope to create a critical mass and actually, by the power of the numbers, surface what works and what doesn't. Because, there are many things you can do, but by really hearing from the people who are doing it on the ground, and by hearing from them, we tried this, it's too expensive, it's not going to work. But on the other hand, we see that this has a huge success. And then spreading that knowledge to all people on the platform and accelerating that, we hope to achieve that. And so, probably by the end of the year, we'll have 200 cities, and we hope to accelerate that to, maybe 1,000 or more in a couple of years. And by then have this voice of the cities and what climate action works, and maybe add some AI to that to detect patterns, etc. And for CarbonCap, we're doing the same, but towards businesses, because we see that businesses all start to wake up, and we want to help them identify the opportunities. Not only am I good or bad, but again, how can I become a better company by doing so? How can I reduce my costs? How can I anticipate certain risks that arrive? But also, what new products and services are needed in this transition, and how can I reinvent myself like how Shell could do, and actually thrive as a business. And we want to also not do this as consultants and just work for 6 months, but give them modern tools. And we believe that if this works with Futureproofed, even though it's going to be really tiny, will have introduced a new way of looking at climate action, not only from an opportunity point of view, but also in the way we do it with these platforms and the knowledge from the community.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a great goal.
It's ambitious.
There's still a lot of work ahead of you.
Yeah.
All right, maybe one or two fun ones to end with. If you wouldn't have seen Al Gore speak, or you wouldn't have lived in Chicago, and you wouldn't have gotten the environmental call, if I can put it that way, what do you think you would have been doing today?
Filmmaker.
Filmmaker?
Yeah. I like to tell stories, and I love how I've always been fascinated by film. My dad was a huge film fanatic, and I've always been fascinated by film. And I know many people who are in the film industry. I see how hard it is in Belgium, to be clear. It's not an easy job. But I also see what it can bring about. A great movie can touch people on so many levels, on a poetic level, on the excitement, but you can tell stories in very subtle ways. And if you see how it's working on Netflix and the other platforms, how a film about a series about chess or about Danish politics can be a worldwide hit, I think it's wonderful, because in the end, it's always the same very human stories that come back, stories that's been around for centuries. L'histoire se répète, as they say, or history repeats itself, but history rhymes with the present. It's not really repeating, but the same themes come back and they rhyme and resonate with what happens now. And so I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to do that, and who knows, maybe it might be a second career after we've solved climate change. When that's done,
goal 2, win an Oscar.
I'll call Netflix and say,
yeah, we live in the golden age of content.
Yeah,
you never know.
Yeah. On the other hand, I might also have been a designer. And I studied as a product design engineer. So because I also think a lot of things still suck, and just things that are around us. For instance, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, etc. It's horrible. I mean, solving it's okay. The table, it's okay. It's real life. Solving that. It's the keuzestress, the stress of choosing a series or movie with your girlfriend or wife or kids, etc. It's a problem to be solved. That I would like, or solving other things as a designer. So that's maybe another option.
Do you have a favorite movie of all time?
Yeah, I have a list, but it's what would be my favorite movie?
Or top 3, or like one good recommendation for the listeners and me, actually.
Yeah.
Also a big movie head. So.
I love, but it's a esoteric old movie. But Der Himmel über Berlin. It's a movie from the 80s by Wim Wenders. About there's been a remake then with Nicolas Cage called Angels in America. It's about angels that live in Berlin and that see. That's been around for centuries, and I see the people and can listen to their thoughts, etc. That movie I love, but I also love movies like Avatar. The complete opposite, because it's to be understood in layers. It's actually a story full of meaning about imperialism and going after resources, and about holistic thinking, but it's packaged in an action movie, and I like it when movies work in that way. But you kind of
there are 4 more coming in. Do you know?
Yeah, but it took its time.
Yeah, they're filming them. What I understand, they're filming them all at once, like Lord of the Rings did. Mm-hmm. So, what biggest movie of all time? So Cameron got like unlimited budget, and then Cameron-wise, he built the universe first, and then he's been filming for like 2 or 3 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's gonna be like 1 movie every year, and I think there's gonna be 4 more coming.
Yeah. And I have a harder time remembering since I've been ill. I don't know if that's a perception or not, but they say chemo brain. It's a thing. I notice with my concentration and stuff like that. But I wish I would have. I'll come back to you in the next time. I'll have
perfect.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Final one. If you could have a drink with anyone, dead or alive, a drink and a dinner, an evening, like a good conversation. Is there anyone who pops up in
a whole list of people. Tony Hawk, I would like to have
Tony Hawk,
the skater. Yeah. I saw a masterclass of Tony Hawk, and I think he's a great guy, because it's really a story of grit and perseverance, and doing things over and over and over again until you get there and dealing with with the pain that goes with it. I think it's very beautiful. And he told also about how he became successful very early on, and then boom, backlash. Skating was out of popularity. So I think he has interesting stories to tell. And I like this grit approach. I heard somewhere recently in life, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you repeat. And I thought, there's something to it. Steve Jobs, I'd love to have, even though I think he's an asshole, personality-wise.
Especially the young version, I think.
Yeah, but he was a real visionary. Yeah. Elon Musk, I spoke with a couple of times.
Okay.
Long ago, 10 years ago, when it was still a small club of Tesla owners. We were foolish enough to have bought the Roadster. It was really like a small community, 2,500 people worldwide. And there was an evening with Elon Musk in Milan once, and we went there, my wife and I, and it was like hardly bigger than here, with 30 or 40 people talking, and he was already talking crazy about making life multiplanetary and even though we were all early adopters there, Tesla Roadster owners, we were like rolling our eyes like, dude, seriously. And then, a couple of years later, the first rocket that landed again, and then bigger and bigger, and his commercial launches, and he's actually still sticking to the vision that he was doing it. It was quite amazing. Yeah. I don't know. Other actors or actresses, a whole list of people. Next time more.
Okay, then I think this is as good a place as any to finish this maybe first session. Serge, I found it extremely interesting. I want to thank you very much to drive over here and to make time for our little organization.
My pleasure.
I think there's nothing else to say, but thank you very much. And
thank you, and keep it up. I love what you're doing. I think this is the kind of impulse the construction industry needs. So go for it. And
thank you. That's nice to hear.
Nice.
Thank you. Thank you. That will keep us going.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Bao Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe to our channel. If you're interested in Bao Living in our Smart Adaptable Module or SAM, go check out our website baoliving.com. If you want to stay up to date, you can best subscribe to our monthly newsletter on our website or follow us on all social media platforms where we're named @Bao Living.